The scandal of the Italian state banks, in which robbery was practiced on an immense scale by politicians of the foremost rank, the bankruptcy of Portugal, the wretched financial situation of Spain and Italy, the profound decadence of the Latin republics of America, prove that the character and morality of certain peoples have sustained incurable injury and that their role in the world is nearly at an end. End of footnote. The individual is losing all empire over himself. He can no longer govern himself, and the man who cannot govern himself must inevitably come before long to be governed by others. To change all this would be a hard task. It would be necessary to change, first of all, our lamentable Latin education. It is fatal to any initiative and energy that heredity may have spared. It extinguishes every gleam of intellectual independence by giving young people as their sole ideal hateful examinations, which, as they only demand efforts of the memory, place in the front rank of our professions intelligences whose servile aptitude for imitation is the negation of all individuality and all personal efforts. Quote, "I try to pour iron into the soul of my pupils," unquote, said an English schoolmaster to Guizot when he was visiting the schools of Great Britain. Where among the Latin nations are the schoolmasters or the programs capable of realizing such an ambition? The military regime will perhaps realize it. In any case, it is the sole educator that is capable of realizing it. One of the principal conditions of improvement for decadent peoples is the organization of a very severe universal military service and the permanent menace of disastrous wars. It is to this general lowering of character, to the powerlessness of the citizens to govern themselves, and to the egotistic indifference that is more especially due the difficulty experienced by the majority of the Latin peoples in living under liberal laws, as far removed from despotism as from anarchy. It is easily understandable that such laws should be little to the liking of the masses, for Caesarism holds out to them the promise, if not of liberty, on which they do not set much store at any rate, of a very considerable measure of equality in servitude. On the other hand, it would be incomprehensible that republican institutions should encounter most opposition from the enlightened classes, but for the necessity of taking into account the weight of ancestral influences. Is it not without such institutions that all forms of superiority, and intellectual superiority in particular, have most chance of being able to display themselves? It might even be said that the only real objection to such institutions, from the point of view of those who stand out for equality at any price, is the fact that they favor the formation of powerful intellectual aristocracies. The most oppressive of regimes, on the contrary, both for character and for the intelligence, is Caesarian in its various forms. All that can be said for it is that it facilitates equality in degradation and humility in servitude. It is well adapted to the inferior minds of decadent peoples, and that is why they always revert to it as soon as they are able. The plume of the first general that comes along will be made the excuse for its adoption. When a people has reached this pass, its hour has struck, its destiny is accomplished. At the present hour, this old-time Caesarian, which history has always seen appear at the earliest dawn of civilizations and at their extreme decadence, is undergoing a manifest evolution. Today we are witnessing its resurrection under the name of socialism. This new expression of state absolutism will assuredly be the most grievous form of Caesarism, because being impersonal, it will escape all the motives of fear that keep the worst tyrants under restraint. Socialism appears today to be the gravest of the dangers that threaten the European peoples. It will doubtless complete a decadence for which many causes are paving the way, and it will perhaps mark the end of Western civilization. To appreciate its dangers and its strengths, it is not the teachings it spreads abroad that must be considered, but the devotion it inspires. Socialism will soon constitute the new faith of the suffering masses, whose existence is often and inevitably rendered far from enviable by the economic conditions of contemporary civilization. It will be the new religion that will people the empty heavens. For all the human creatures who cannot support misery unrelieved by illusion, this religion will replace the luminous paradise of which the painted windows of the churches spoke to them in the past. This great religious entity of tomorrow sees the crowd of its faithful increase every day. It will soon have its martyrs, and it will then become one of those religious creeds which stir up peoples and whose power for souls is absolute. That the dogmas of socialism lead to a regime of degrading slavery, which will destroy all initiative and all independence in the souls bowed beneath its empire, is doubtless evident, but only by psychologists acquainted with the condition of man's existence. Such foresight is beyond the reach of the masses. They require arguments of a different order to persuade them, and these arguments have never been furnished by reason. That the new dogmas we see coming into being are contrary to the most elementary good sense is also evident. But were not the religious dogmas that have guided men during so many centuries also contrary to good sense, and has the fact hindered them from subjecting the most luminous geniuses to their laws? In the matter of his beliefs, man only hearkens to the unconscious voice of his sentiments. They form an obscure domain from which reason has always been excluded. In consequence, and by the mere fact of the mental constitution created them by a long past, the peoples of Europe will be obliged to undergo the redoubtable phase of socialism. It will be the signal for their entry on one of the last stages of decadence. By causing civilization to revert to wholly inferior forms of evolution, it will facilitate the destructive invasions by which we are threatened. Outside Russia, whose population from the psychological point of view is much more Asiatic than European, the English would seem to be almost the only race in Europe possessing sufficient energy, stable enough beliefs, and a sufficiently independent character to avoid succumbing to the new religion, the birth of which we are witnessing. Modern Germany, in spite of deceptive appearances of prosperity, will doubtless be its first victim. Judging from the success of the various sects that abound within its frontiers, the socialism that will prove its ruin will doubtless be couched in strictly scientific formulae, of value at the best for an ideal society such as humanity will never produce. But this latest child of pure reason will be more intolerant and more redoubtable than all its elders. No people is so well prepared as Germany to accept its yoke. No people of the present age has more entirely lost its initiative, its independence, and the habit of self-government. Footnote: the most eminent German writers are perfectly agreed on this point. In his recent book on the social questions, Herr T. Ziegler, professor at the University of Strasbourg, expresses himself as follows, quote, while, quote, self-help, unquote, is the dominant tendency in England, recourse to the state is the characteristic of Germany. We are a people that for centuries has been accustomed to be under a guardian. Moreover, during the last 20 years, the strong arm of Bismarck, by assuring us security, has caused us to lose the sentiment of responsibility and initiative. It is for this reason that in difficult and even in easy cases, we appeal for the aid and protection of the state and abandon ourselves to its initiative. Unquote. End of footnote. As to Russia, it has evolved too recently from the regime of the, quote, mir, unquote, that is to say, from primitive communism, the most perfect form of socialism, to return to this inferior stage of evolution. It has other destinies. It is doubtless Russia that will one day furnish the irresistible flood of barbarians destined to destroy the old civilizations of the West, whose end will have been led up to by economic struggles and socialism. This hour, however, has not struck as yet. To reach it, we have still to traverse certain phases. Socialism will be too oppressive a regime to last. It will make people regret the age of Tiberius and Caligula, and will bring back that age. One sometimes asks how the Romans of the time of the emperors so easily supported the wild ferocity of certain despots. The reason is that they too had traversed social struggles, civil wars and proscriptions, and the experience had cost them their character. They had come to consider these tyrants as the ultimate instruments of their salvation. They put up with everything from them because they did not know how to replace them. The truth is they cannot be replaced. After them came the final catastrophe, brought about by the barbarians. History always turns in the same circle.